Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hey there, welcome back to the conversation. Today we're going to deepen our exploration of self-awareness. Now, this has turned out to be somewhat of a series. I didn't realize it at first, but it just seems to be coming up that way. And that's one of the things that I do. Sometimes I negotiate my agenda with that of the universe's, meaning that sometimes I have an idea in my head how things are going to go, what I'm going to talk about, and then the universe floods me with ideas, floods me with concepts that this is the thing you're supposed to talk about. And it almost feels like what I originally wanted to talk about is so off in the distance that it's not worth going to pick it up. So why not just talk about what's at the forefront? And that is today, self-awareness. I thought I would talk about some of the tools that you can use as you deepen your own self-awareness. Now, levels of awareness is relative in general because everyone's on a different playing field, everyone's on a different scale, everyone has access to different aspects of awareness. And so I guess I should say, along this journey, your own exploration of self-awareness is do not compare yourself to other people, because they're not you, you're not them. Wherever you are is where you are. Wherever they are is where they are. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where they are. Your only concern is evolving your own self-awareness. Now, you don't have to, but I consider it to be the spiritual adventure. That as a human being, when we're younger, that this experience of being a human being, we're brought into the world with a relatively blank slate. We have some predispositions, we have some etheric memories, probably from a past life or given to us from our higher self, but for all intents and purposes, your mind is wiped clean. And as a child, you are in a trance state. It's referred to as a hypnagogic state from the age of 0 to about 13 years old. The reason why is that we need to learn a whole host of skills, a whole host of ideas, and trance is the perfect learning state. And put simply, the critical factor has been turned off and our capacity to receive new information is wide open. That could be said to be a basic definition of trance. So while we're in this hypnagogic state or this trance state, we model those adults, those other human beings in our life on the other-than-conscious level. We copy them for all intents and purposes. We watch them like a hawk. We observe how do they handle stress, how do they handle anger, how do they process their emotions, how do they handle upset, disappointment. Because most of these things you're not instructed on how to handle them consciously. You pick it up other than consciously. So if you look back to your childhood, chances are you're more of an adult than a child at this point. So if you look back at your childhood and you look at your current behavior, you can see patterns that you have expressed in your adult life that are a direct reflection of your parents. Possibly one or the other that you modeled more specifically, or perhaps you've mishmashed different attributes of both parents. Or if your parents weren't really around, your significant caregiver. Now, with that said, if you're a parent, if you're a caregiver, if you have children in your charge that you take care of, that you foster, that you basically are bringing up into adulthood, understand by their very design, they are going to do less of what you say and more of what you do. The behavior that you model is the behavior you're teaching them. And this is why I say the greatest gift that you can give your children is to heal yourself, develop yourself. Become a better communicator, become more self-aware so you can be a better model. So where are we in this conversation? If you go back over your childhood, you realize as an adult you have a lot of unconscious skills, a lot of unconscious patterns that are buried in your other-than-conscious mind. And for the most part, you run on automatic. So if you do nothing else from this moment forward, you just rely on your past programming, more than likely you'll get through life okay. You'll do okay. If your parents were able to do it, then more than likely you will too, just by default, your default programming. But if you really want to take mastery over yourself, and I believe this is the spiritual adventure, to bring the unconscious into conscious awareness, so then you can choose it. And rather than being reactive in life, you can be proactive. It's developing a relationship between your other-than-conscious mind and your conscious mind. Now, as I proceed in this conversation, you're going to hear some things you probably won't hear other places. I've been studying hypnosis and the other-than-conscious mind since I was 13 years old. I have a different appreciation for the role of the conscious mind and the unconscious or other-than-conscious mind. A lot of people tend to think of their subconscious mind as being, I guess, at odds with. It's kind of like in the basement, in the background. It's not really present in your day-to-day. You're more conscious. You're making conscious choices in your life. And I'm saying, well, not so much. By and large, you operate from subconscious patterns. Even when you think you're being conscious, it's still an unconscious pattern. Because in my model of the world, in my model of the mind, what you're currently conscious of is a gift from your other-than-conscious mind. See, I don't believe there's just your conscious mind and then your subconscious mind, like two separate parts. They are somewhat melded together. If you're visual, think of a gradient moving from black to white. There's a lot of gray in between, different shading. And depending on the strength of a particular color, that may mean that one side, the subconscious or other than conscious, or your conscious mind is more prevalent at that moment. But they slide back and forth. What you're currently conscious of is a gift from your other than conscious mind. For the most part, the role of the conscious mind is to ask good questions. For instance, where are my keys? And then your other than conscious mind helps you remember, gives you a memory of where the keys are. I can remember one time looking for my keys for about 30 minutes, getting more and more frustrated as I went. I kept telling myself, I can't find my keys. Why can't I find my keys? Where are my keys? And I held my hand up and they were in my hand the whole time. I kept saying, I don't know where my keys are. And so my other than conscious mind was following my direction, following my lead. And I didn't know. It wasn't revealing where my keys were. This phenomenon is referred to as a scotoma or a blind spot. A lot of times you go out in the kitchen and you're looking for something particular. Maybe you're looking for the salt or the pepper or whatever. And you say, I can't find it. I don't know where it is. Someone yells from the other room and says, it's right there on the counter next to the stove. I don't see it. And, oh gosh, and they get up and they have to come and they walk right by you, reach out and grab the salt and say, if it was a snake, it would have bit you. You see, the other than conscious mind will follow our lead. It works for us. And so how I handle my keys today is I ask my other than conscious mind, if I can't readily put my hands on my keys, lead me to my keys. I know you know where they are. Now, by and large, I put my key in the same spot every time. It has a home. And without fail, I will put the key back on the hook in the same spot every time I return home. And how I remember to do that is because I'm working with my other than conscious mind. It reminds me to hang it up. I don't even really think about it anymore. It's unconscious. There's no conscious participation for the most part. And you have those kinds of experiences all the time. You have a getting dressed trance, you have an eating trance, you have a drinking trance, you have a brushing your teeth trance. Those skills have been relegated to the other than conscious mind. It's no longer consciously important for you to engage in these. So for the most part, you start the process and then your other than conscious mind carries out the details. Now you might be asking, what does all this have to do with self-awareness? Well, if you want to increase your self-awareness, and you've been listening to me as I've talked about the role of the other than conscious mind in your awareness, then I suggest you ask your other than conscious mind for an increase in self-awareness. Say, I want to have a conscious appreciation of more of my experience, a conscious appreciation, a conscious awareness of who I am and some of the programs that are operating in the background. In 1988, when I first walked on hot coals, I was scared to death. I was really afraid of burning. And I really psyched myself out to the point where my other than conscious mind blotted out almost every sensation about it. My visual field was like a tunnel. I don't even hardly remember the people around me. I was standing in front of the bed of hot coals, and somebody next to me said, go, you're ready. And I took the step. And as I was walking across, it felt like I was walking on popcorn. I had no sense of heat, no sense of actually walking on anything. Then I got to the other side and I celebrated. And I thought to myself in that moment, there's no way there was any heat in those coals. even though as I looked down, they were glowing. And because of that experience, I discounted the whole event. I discounted the legitimacy of walking, or that walk, on hot coals. Well, a couple years later, I had the opportunity in 1991 to walk on coals again. Different firewalk instructor, different event, and I asked my other-than-conscious mind for a deeper appreciation, a conscious appreciation of the experience of walking on coals. I didn't want to feel any pain, no, but I wanted a deeper awareness of the whole event. This fire was actually a lot hotter. It wasn't transported anywhere else. There was about 3 feet of wood that was burnt right down in one spot. All the big chunks were kind of raked aside. And this was a bed of like 6 inches deep of burning hot coals. This time, though, when I walked, I could feel the heat. It wasn't really hot, but I could feel the heat. I could feel my feet sinking in the coals covering the top of my feet. And as I took each step, the coals that were on top of my foot would kind of fly off to the side. I walked step by step across those hot coals, and I can remember virtually every aspect of that walk, more so than any other walk I've done since. And I've walked nearly 600 times over hot coals since that second event. Oh, I almost forgot. The other thing that I wanted, remember in the first walk, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're ready." I wanted to decide on my own when to take the first step. I had someone tell me to go. And when I didn't go and they said to go, then they said, "Why don't you go to the back of the line?" And then I decided to take the step. I was tuning in to know when I was ready. I wanted that experience. And in having that experience, I realized that's the real magic of walking on burning hot coals. But the real point of my story here is to point out that I had a greater conscious awareness of that event because I asked for it. In 1991, I was 31. And I need to point out that I began studying self-hypnosis, and playing with my other-than-conscious mind, building rapport with my other-than-conscious mind since I was 13. So for the past 17 years at that point, I had been diving in deep with my other-than-conscious mind. And so I had built a relationship with myself at the other-than-conscious level. Now, you can develop this relationship relatively quickly. And when you ask, when you ask someone for advice or someone asks you for advice and you dole out pearls of wisdom, and then you see that person maybe a week or a year later, and you want to know, how did the advice work? "Oh, I didn't do anything with it." And you ask, "Well, do you still have the problem?" And they go, "Oh, yeah, it's still there." "Well, why didn't you take my advice?" I just didn't think it was going to work for me." In that moment, you say to yourself, "I'm not giving them advice ever again." And so in some ways, this is how your other-than-conscious mind works. If you ask for answers, and this is the same thing with intuition, if you ask for intuitive guidance, if you ask for something from your other-than-conscious mind, and you get the answer, you might not consciously like it. But if you're asking the wiser aspect of yourself, then follow the advice, take the action, do the step. Because if you want to continue getting answers from your other-than-conscious mind, you need to follow through on whatever answer you get. And so if you ask your other-than-conscious mind something about your past, something about your inner programming, and what you see or what's revealed to you, you don't necessarily like, don't shun it, don't push it away. Look at it, experience it, and say to yourself, "Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that interesting? I wonder where that came from. I wonder how that plays out in my life." Start getting curious about it. Curiosity is key. Wanting to know, wanting to investigate, wanting to go in that inquiry. Now, curiosity is probably important enough to have on the front end before you ask your other-than-conscious mind. So that's your first tool, to embrace curiosity, to explore, to discover, to uncover, to get curious. Just how deep does the rabbit hole go? Then you ask your other-than-conscious mind. The next tool, so you've got curiosity and you're asking, and we'll talk more about asking and asking good questions, but the next thing is to be present with the answer, to be present with it. If pain comes up, be present with the pain. Be a witness to it. Acknowledge it. You don't necessarily have to feel it, but you can acknowledge the pain and just say, "This is painful. This is uncomfortable." The next tool in your journey for self-discovery is the power of questions, to ask intelligent questions. Ask good questions by which you want the answer to. The last 2 or 3 episodes have given you several questions that you can ask your other-than-conscious mind to delve deeper and arrive at a place of greater self-awareness. Now, when you ask these questions, you can contemplate, in a meditative state, you can contemplate the answer or potential answers for this question. I have spent many, many hours in contemplation. Another way of thinking about contemplation is ruminating over an answer, playing around with it, being in the inquiry, looking at it from different perspectives. What does it really mean? How deep does this go? How pervasive is this behavior? A variation on this theme is to journal, to write about it. Write down the question at the top of the page and then just free flow. Allow your other-than-conscious mind just to write stuff out, to word vomit on it. I had a client the other day asking about automatic writing. She said that she fails miserably at it, or in the past, she had failed miserably at it. She sits there and doesn't seem like anything comes. Well, it's almost like you're putting too much stress on it. It has to be so significant. You're waiting for the heavens to open and all these pearls of wisdom to roll out. So to begin, rather than waiting for something significant to come through, just write what comes to mind. I'm sitting here in my room, writing in my journal. Just matter of fact, this is what you're currently present to. This is what I'm feeling. This is what's coming up. I just had a memory pop in my head, and you write that down. And I wonder what that's about. And you can just go down deeper and deeper. Sometimes, suddenly, while you're dumping all this other stuff on the paper, you have a clear insight. That's when you start writing even more vigorously around that. And you get curious, how much more is there? I myself have used journaling off and on over the years to great effect. More so earlier in my life, but I have sat down with a pencil and paper, pen and paper, every morning, every day, since I was in my teens. I have notebooks and notebooks, and I just write down ideas as they pop in my head. Sometimes I reorganize my thinking. Sometimes I write out complete thoughts, complete statements, and other times I just write down ideas. I do mind maps, and I doodle, and there's to-do lists, and I have sat down with a pen and paper every day, sometimes multiple times a day, ever since I was 17. That's over 40 years. Now, sometimes it's just kind of crap stuff I dump on the paper. Other times it's holy cow ideas. And then other times, while I'm writing those things down, more ideas come in. I sit down with the pen and paper in order to receive. I open up and I'm in this state of receiving. And then sometimes I wake up and I can hardly get out of bed because I have all these ideas flowing through my head, and I have to nail them down to paper, because I know that if I don't nail them down to paper, chances are they will float off into the ether and they're harder to come back to. So you want to strike while the iron is hot. That is a blacksmithing term. But it's essentially seize the moment. While the idea is there, nail it down to paper. Now, another tool that is a close second to journaling is a log. And a log is essentially measuring something or keeping track of something. You can have a food log if you want to gain awareness of your eating habits. Create a food log. So every time you eat something over the next 2 weeks, write it down. With no judgment. No judgment. You just want to write it down to see what you're taking in. You write down what you're taking in, and then the quantity of what you're taking in, and then the time of day that you're taking it in. And you can even, if it's emotional eating that you want to get a handle on, you take a note of what are you feeling at that moment. Were you really hungry? How did you feel after you ate it? I guarantee if you do this for 2 weeks, you're going to have a greater self-awareness of your habits, your eating patterns, more so than you ever have in your life. Then you can start making conscious choices of it. A lot of times when people do this, they never realize how much they're eating or what time or how late they're eating. Another way to use this is recording your workouts, recording how much you do, how much weight you lift, what the exercises. And then you can actually, at the end of it, I'm proud of yourself. You have a record of your workout. That in and of itself is more reinforcing. You have a greater awareness, a greater appreciation of working out, of actually doing something. Okay, so how are we doing? Checking in. What are you present to? What are you aware of? Have any good ideas? Any insights? Well, this episode ended up going about 40 minutes, so I broke this up in two. So we're ending the first part and we'll pick up the rest of the conversation in part 2. So until I meet you in the next episode, this has been your host and friend Daniel Danovi, urging you to follow your bliss, live your life from inner signals, be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure